We have undertaken to establish sectoral data lakes in Europe. But what about establishing a data ocean built upon the Atlantic? A space where pooling and sharing of data will be done with respect to the rules and values acceptable to all involved within our reach. These questions will be tackled by our next discussion, titled From Data Lakes to a Data Ocean, Debating the Future of Transatlantic Data Transfers. And I am really delighted to be able to introduce and welcome our distinguished speakers. Mr. Patrick Breyer, Member of the European Parliament, Ms. Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, Director General of Digital Europe, Ms. Lise Fuhr, Director General of the European Telecommunications Network Operators Association, Ms. Alisa Vekeman, Policy Officer, International Data Flows and Protection at the DigiJust European Commission, Mr. Mark Montgomery, Senior Advisor, former Executive Director at the US Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and as the host of the discussion, Ms. Anna Jankov, Director for Strategic Communications at the FTI Consulting. Welcome. Anna, the air is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the panel discussion entitled From Data Leaks to a Data Ocean, Debating the Future of Transatlantic Data Transfers. The discussion over transatlantic data transfers are in the focus of the latest digital and tech developments. Data is the most valuable resource in the digital economy, and data flows are essential for maintaining the free economy and international relations. I have very little to add, actually, after such a comprehensive keynote speech of Commissioner Reynders. So I will briefly recap what are the painful, the contentious points that we are facing today when it comes to data flows. The data transfers have been restricted due to several recent developments. I will mention the most important of them. In July 2020, by its so-called Schrems II judgment, the European Court of Justice invalidated the Privacy Shield, which was a convenient instrument for transferring personal data from the EU to the US. Companies worldwide are still struggling to adjust to the consequences of Schrems II and are dealing with a huge deal of uncertainty and additional regulatory burden while assessing alternative data transfer instruments. Then there is another important data protection policy developed relevant for companies which benefit from personal data transfers from the EU to the UK. As we all know, with Brexit, the UK has become a third country destination when it comes to data protection. In December last year, Brexit negotiators have agreed a further 6 months transition period to enable the European Commission to complete its adequacy assessment of the UK's data protection laws. In February this year, the Commission initiated the process towards the adoption of adequacy decision for the UK. This has attracted a lot of attention from politicians and human rights activists alike, and the direction of development is still unknown. We have also seen proposal for new regulations, such as the Data Governance Act proposed by the European Commission, that has put an obligation on data sharing intermediaries to appoint a legal representative in an EU member state, and which has also in some segments extended certain principles of general data protection legislation to the transfers of non-personal data. Europeans have also sped up their efforts to establish a European federated cloud under the name Gaia-X in order to achieve great sovereignty. As mentioned, we have taken effort to establish some sectoral data lakes, but what about establishing a data ocean that is a global space where our data will be safe? When discussing these recent data protection developments, we should also think about how can politicians, entrepreneurs, and privacy activists on both sides of the Atlantic navigate this evolving landscape and not lose sight of the common direction that is the revival of transatlantic relationship. As part of today's event, we are going to dive deeper into these topics with an impressive lineup of diverse panelists. I would encourage questions from the audience, which can be placed in the chat box, and time permitting, we will try to address some of them towards the end of the discussion. My name is Jankov. I'm the Director at Strategic Communications in FTI Consulting Brussels office, and I will be moderating today's panel. Again, I'm honored to introduce our panelists today, starting with Mr. Patrick Breyer. Dr. Patrick Breyer is a member of the European Parliament of the Pirate Party Germany and the European Pirate Party since 2019. As a lawyer and digital freedom fighter, he is committed to defending human rights in the age of the digital revolution in the Committee of Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs and the Legal Affairs Committee. His political work is committed to facilitate freedom and self-determination for all people in the world without mass surveillance. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Alisa Vekeman, who is a member of the International Data Flows and Protection Unit of the European Commission, where she leads the work on transatlantic data flows. She also works on the modernization of the standard contractual clauses, the adequacy talks with South Korea, and existing adequacy decisions. Prior to joining the European Commission, Alisa Vekeman worked for the EU delegation to the Council of Europe, where she followed the negotiations of the modernized Council of Europe Convention 108. She holds degrees in law and human rights. Next, I would like to introduce Mrs. Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, who is the Director General of Digital Europe, the leading digital technology industry association, representing over 35,000 digital companies in Europe. She has more than 25 years of experience in the ICT industry. She's a member of the Stakeholder Cybersecurity Certification Group of ENISA, that is the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, and of NATO's High-Level Advisory Group for Emerging and Disruptive Technologies, as well as a board member of the European Commission's Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition at the European Parliament-led European Internet Forum. Next, we have our panelist, Ms. Lise Fuhr, the Director General of ETNO, the association representing Europe's leading telecom operator, and she has been on that position since 2016. Lise leads and oversees all the activities and is the main external spokesperson. Lise sits on the EXO, European Cybersecurity Organization board for ETNO. She has more than 20 years of experience in the telecoms industry and has worked at the Danish Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, where she was in charge of telecom regulation. And last but not the least, we have with us Mr. Mark Montgomery from the US Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Mark serves as the senior advisor to the chairman of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and was previously the executive director. He is also a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He previously served as policy director for the Senate Armed Services Committee under the leadership of Senator John Vekeman and completed 32 years as a nuclear trained surface warfare officer in the US Navy, retiring as a Rear Admiral in 2017. Without further ado, I would love to start a discussion, and hopefully interactive, on the transatlantic data flows. I would love to start with Ms. Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl from Digital Europe. Cecilia, the Schrems II decision has undoubtedly altered the state of international data flows to a great extent. The ruling has not only annulled the privacy shield, but also requires all organizations exporting data outside the EEA to assess on a case-by-case basis their use of standard contractual clauses or binding corporate rules, as the case may be, in order to ensure it does not pose a risk to the data, in particular in terms of access by third country governments. Digital Europe has recently contributed to a survey with aim to quantify the actual consequences of Schrems II and what are specifically these consequences on the economy. Thus, with the aim to present those consequences in a more tangible way for the public. Could you please tell us more about the survey and the outcomes? Sorry, I believe you are muted.
I'm sorry, I thought I was called by you guys. I'm so sorry. I hope that you hear now.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you much, and apologies. So, as I said, Digital Europe, we have 40 associations in what we call EU Plus, so also Turkey and other places, and we join forces with a few other European organizations to basically establish some kind of baseline of what this could really mean to the economy if data flows, especially business to business, is actually closed down due to the disruption of the ruling and this ruling. With hundreds of companies.
I don't know if we can hear you. Maybe we shall move on then to the next speaker while the issue is sorted out. So hopefully, Cecilia, you can rejoin us in a while. In the meantime, I would like to ask Alisa Vekeman to tell us more. How is the European legislature responding to the post-Schrems II situation? More specifically, what is the state of play with the talks with the US on the replacement of the privacy shield? What is the state of play with the new modernized standard contractual clauses, and what are other notable developments currently going on?
Sure, I hope you can hear me, because I
Yes.
also had some connection issues before. I missed your introduction, unfortunately. But firstly, let me thank you for the invitation. It's very nice to be here to discuss this important topic with my fellow panelists. So to respond to your question about what we are doing, and I'm of course going to speak on behalf of the Commission, not on other EU institutions, not the legislator as such. But in the Commission, our priority after the Schrems II judgment is essentially twofold. On the one hand, of course, ensuring that personal data of individuals is protected when it leaves the EU. But then on the other hand, also ensuring that there are solid tools available to those that have to transfer data outside of EU, so companies and other entities that rely on data flows for a lot of their daily operations. So you mentioned already two important work streams that we're working on. One is our talks with the United States. So almost immediately after the judgment, already this summer, the Commission initiated talks with the US Department of Commerce to explore the possibility of a new strengthened privacy, well, not a privacy shield, but a successor to the privacy shield. And there is a clear willingness on both sides to work on solutions. This has been reflected, for example, in a joint statement that was issued this summer by Commissioner Reinders and then Commerce Secretary Ross. It has also been, I think, very clearly indicated on EU side in the agenda that we issued in December on how we see our cooperation with the US and with the new administration more generally. And I think that there is a clear recognition on both sides that a new adequacy decision, a new adequacy finding, that would be the most comprehensive and the most stable solution for transatlantic data flows. So in the past months, we've had exploratory talks, more at technical level, but now that, of course, that the new administration is fully in place, we expect that this is going to intensify and that this is also going to continue more at political level. Of course, we do have to recognize that the judgment raises very complicated, very complex issues, and it concerns an area of national security that, of course, by its nature is already particularly sensitive. So it's all about, this delicate balance, but very important balance, of course, between privacy and national security. So it's not an easy issue to address, but we on EU side, we're certainly ready to be creative. Although in the end, it's of course, first of all, for the US side to suggest or to concrete proposals of what is feasible legally and politically on US side, because they are, of course, the best experts of their system. Keeping in mind, of course, that what matters for us, and that I think should be very clear, that any possible solution fully comply with all of the requirements of the Schrems II judgment. And we have said this, we keep saying this in the Commission, that can be no quick fix, no shortcuts. We're not going to deal with one aspect of the judgment and not address the other one. We need a solid solution that fully addresses the Schrems II judgment. And that's also the only way to provide the real legal certainty that our stakeholders need. So that's one of our work streams in response to the judgment. And the other one, as you also already mentioned, is the work on the modernization of the standard contract clauses, so the SCCs. This is a tool, and the survey that was done by Digital Europe actually showed this very clearly, that this is the most used tool actually for data transfers for European companies. It's a tool that has existed for quite some time, but there was also a very clear need to modernize the SCCs. So it's something that we had to do regardless of the Schrems II judgment, to update them in light of changes in the digital economy, to update them or to align them with the GDPR. And now, after the Schrems II judgment, also, of course, to address additional clarifications provided by the Court of Justice. So what we try to do with the SCCs is to incorporate the clarifications that have been provided by court into the SCCs, with the aim of providing companies with a toolbox, essentially setting out the different steps that they have to take to do this case-by-case assessment, what possible measures they could include if necessary to address any issues that they identify. Of course, the SCCs remain a standardized tool, so they cannot provide a magic or one-size-fits-all solutions. It will still be necessary to use them in line with the requirements of the court and in line with guidance from the European Data Protection Board. But we still think that by providing this toolbox and these very different elements, by putting or incorporating them into the SCCs, we still think that will be a very useful tool to assist companies in their compliance efforts. So we published a first draft of the SCCs in November, and we had a broad public consultation where we received around 200 submissions. We also received an opinion from the European Data Protection Board and the European Data Protection Supervisor. And all the feedback that we received is very concrete, very detailed, and we are, of course, looking carefully at all of those comments. And now, at the moment, we are basically finalizing the final draft of the SCCs after all of those comments. And then we will continue with the next steps in the adoption procedure, because to adopt the final version of the SCCs, we still need the green light from the member states, so positive vote by member state experts. And with that in mind, we're aiming at the final adoption of the SCCs still in spring, so somewhere in April. And maybe last point I want to say on this is that when we will issue the SCCs, we will also issue together with them a Q&A document or some form of guidance to explain in more detail how the new SCCs should be used. And maybe a last comment I just want to make, that of course in doing all of this work, in particular on the SCCs, we're also working very closely with the data protection authorities, because they have a key role to play here, also to assist, to advise companies on how to comply with the judgment. So we're also working very closely with them on their guidance, which they're also finalizing now after they also had quite a broad public consultation. So I think I will stop here for the moment, but those are basically the main work streams that we're working on to specifically address the Schrems II judgments.
Thank you very much, Alisa. This is very, very helpful overview of the state of play on the Commission side. Before moving on to explore more the issue of whether and how it's possible to reconcile, as Alisa said, the data protection requirements on the one hand and the national security requirements on the other hand, I just want to check in with Cecilia. Can we hear you now?
I hope so.
Okay, I'm
so it just confirms that we need more investment in infrastructure, right? So apologies for disappearing. Yeah. No, basically what I was trying to explain was that we have 40 associations. We have around 35,000 members, and we conducted a survey with hundreds and hundreds of companies across different industries. And this is really, I mean, the disruption of data flows would have a huge effect. We learned that more than 90% of the companies are transferring data outside Europe. 50% of them has absolutely no idea that they are facing legal uncertainty, and that is in spite of actually we targeted data protection officers and people within the companies that knew about data flows and about cybersecurity. And we learned that more than 3/4 actually transferring to non-EU countries, which means that if we have a disruption, of course, this will have a huge effect. We see that the ICT sector was coming in #1 on data flows, but right after that was manufacturing and other sectors. So this is really across the board a huge problem. And in fact, only 10% of the survey was directly business to consumers. So most of them are business to business, using, for example, data transfers between subsidiaries. So if you have companies in more countries, you need to do daily business, sending each other mails, materials, transfers of different type of data. And I think one thing for sure here, and it is a little bit funny to be a little bit geeky. You can say that discuss data flows is always like there's privacy on one side and then there is like violation on the other. But it also confirms that there are a lot of data which is basically you can call non-sensitive, that we need to find out a framework of categorization of sensitive and non-sensitive, because right now the interpretation from the European Data Protection Board is quite harsh. It says basically it has to be totally unreadable or encrypted if you need to transfer any kind of data. And I think Europe has come a long way. We worked with Japan. I just came from a meeting with Japan earlier today. We have worked on finding transfer mechanisms. We have worked on how to align data protection. Of course, for example, the country like US, we have issues with different surveillance laws, and those have kind of been taboos in policy that we, because national security cannot be discussed. But I think we have reached the point where government problems to align their rules is really hampering the business, and the business is in the end is what's going to recover the economy. So how do we make sure that companies can do their thing and give jobs and transfer data among subsidiaries, and that governments really work together? And we know the Transatlantic Council, this will be a discussion, but it is really also something that we would like to take to a WTO level to make sure that it has the right attention and that governments really are committed to finding solutions that respect both privacy, but also that data transfers are possible. And actually, it should be possible within the GDPR, but we can return to that.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. This is extremely useful to hear what are the most painful aspects of these data flow restrictions. I think you mentioned two very important things. One is the scale of the economy, which is impacted by potential restrictions to data transfers. And number two, it is the issue of selecting data or let's say classifying data into more sensitive and which deserve a higher degree of protection, and those less sensitive or non-sensitive, the circulation of which should be facilitated and enabled across borders in a much simpler way. I would like to go now to Mr. Patrick Breyer, and I'm sure you can bring plenty of insights as someone who is a prominent data activist. How do you see the potential reconciliation of data protection and national security practices? Is it possible? We see that there is a pressing need to achieve a compromise that will work and will not pose significant obstacles for the economy. What, in your opinion, needs to be done to ensure adequate level of data protection in the United States, and can we get there?
Thank you for having me. And yes, it's very much possible to reconcile right to privacy and the needs of industry, and we actually need industry's help to achieve that. But let me make a couple of preliminary remarks. First of all, data protection is about the right to informational self-determination, that every citizen should have the right to decide themselves who knows what about our private life, because it's a this is needed for the exercise of many fundamental rights. If you don't know who's aware of your secrets, then you cannot behave freely. And that's why, regarding the motto of this, or the title of this discussion, the so-called sectorial data lakes are really about purpose limitation. And they are meant for keeping us safe, for safeguarding our cybersecurity. The data that people don't have access to are safe from being stolen or from being lost. And that's why data protection is also always a matter of security. In times of digital technology and data processing, there is no such thing as non-sensitive data, because you can always combine data in a way that makes it threatening or dangerous to people. And it's also important to Europe that privacy issues are not dealt with in the context of trade negotiations, that these two issues are separated. Now, when it comes to the GDPR and transatlantic data flows, the data protection regulation does not ban data flows that are necessary for performing a contract. For example, if a European buys goods in the United States, of course, it'll be legal to process this their personal data. But the GDPR is about cases where the transfers of personal data to third countries is not necessary for performing a contract. So in those cases, in principle, the data could and should be kept safely in the European Union itself, where a strong level of data protection is ensured, or in other third countries that have a similar level of protection. The standard contractual clauses are not really a workable alternative to that, because the problems that come with intelligence and mass surveillance programs also affect data transfers under these clauses, and obviously contractual clauses cannot do anything about the activities of the intelligence agencies. And here the problem we're dealing with is that mass surveillance of private communications, either metadata or the content of our private communications, violates the fundamental right to privacy. It has a chilling effect on society, including on particularly confidential communications of regarding professional secrecy, journalism, whistleblowers, dissidents, etc. pp. And eventually, under permanent and pervasive mass surveillance, I think a monotone society would form, where people would no longer dare to speak up and fight for their rights, and we don't want to move there. And also, there is no proof that untargeted surveillance specifically was keeping us safe. As you know, the US itself has evaluated a program to retain information on all calls, and found that really it didn't have a significantly positive effect on safety. And I think the same goes for other mass surveillance programs. And so the US legislation in that respect needs amending to exclude untargeted mass surveillance, and procedurally to make sure that everyone affected by such surveillance programs has legal redress, including Europeans, but also people globally. And I hope the Commission negotiations with the United States is very clear regarding these requirements. I'm afraid that in the past it failed to enforce them, and repeatedly accepted arrangements that did not adequately protect personal data, including in the upcoming case of the UK. And I think it's no good either for citizens nor for the industry to see another failed attempt to accept arrangements that will then fail in court. And maybe let me add one last sentence. Regrettably, yourself has mass surveillance laws in place, and I very much like that. But we are also dealing with this issue. It's pending before the European Court of Human Rights, and I think will deliver strong to bring also our own surveillance laws in line with the fundamental rights.
Thank you, Patrick. Two main things that I gathered, and which are a perfect intro for our next panelist, Mark Montgomery's input. It's potentially excessive mass surveillance conducted by non-EU countries, and excessive data retention policies. Mark, from the US, coming from the cybersecurity body, how do you see the EU-US data talks evolving, especially in light of what Mr. Breyer just mentioned? What do you see are the biggest challenges, and how will this reflect potentially on the cybersecurity environment?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and join this panel. If I was mean-spirited, I would say the chief obstacle is the hypocrisy of the European Court of Justice. But luckily, I'm not mean-spirited, and really, I do think there's an opportunity on the horizon. And I think the U.S. would be well served to kind of set those kind of thoughts aside. I think the Biden administration takes privacy seriously, and they're going to work to come to an agreeable solution with the European Commission over the Privacy Shield or follow-on Privacy Shield negotiations. I do think the biggest obstacle in European Union U.S. data talks is one of trust, and in some respects, a fundamental mismatch in the reality and the perception of surveillance regimes in both jurisdictions. I do think we need to acknowledge the European Court of Justice has a very different standard in how it views intelligence surveillance between EU member states and the United States, how that ECHR ruling is applied. And in the Schrems II decision, the court applied far more rigorous standard on the United States than it does on EU member states. And in fact, I would say the United States maintains a very robust system of independent legal review and oversight over intelligence collection activities. This has been brought out into the public over the last 4 years. And I know there's been bad publicity, but the procedures under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court are really some of the most robust in the world. It's backed up in our country by a strong questioning attitude from our press that really raises and keeps these issues highlighted. Now, that doesn't mean the U.S. can't pursue some intelligence reform. For one, I think we need to ensure that relevant U.S. policy documents, that provide great oversight and the guardrails on intelligence collection get codified into law. That's something the Cyberspace Solarium Commission is working in a number of areas, codifying policy into law. And I think this is another area that's ripe for this. In particular, the U.S. could codify Presidential Policy Directive 28. That's the document that provides additional guidance to the National Security Agency and provides strict limits on the bulk collection of data. It should, that executive order was instituted in the wake of some leaks in 2014, but I think it's, we've had enough time with this policy directive to understand the strengths and weaknesses and to get it codified into legislation. I think if we do that, the negotiations will go well. Not hypocrisy about what the EU states do themselves notwithstanding, I think the Biden administration is well positioned to achieve success here. And I think it'll lead to broader success in other tech areas. So I'm pretty excited over how the next 2 years will be. And I think both the EU and the United States will be happy on the other side of this.
Thank you very much, Mark. These are interesting views, and we'll get a question of the U.S. legal regime and how our other speakers perceive it could adjust so as to accommodate the European standards. I will go now to Lisa. I would like to ask Lisa, how did Schrems II and the related restriction on personal data flows influence the telco industry sector specifically? I'm sure you have plenty to say about this topic, including the cybersecurity element, which is right here.
Yes, thank you, Anna. And I would like to take a step back first and set the context of the telcos, because we're in the business of connectivity as such. So that's our main focus. So world-class 5G connectivity and fiber is actually going to be the driver of Europe's future, of the digital leadership that we're looking into. We saw more that connectivity when it's not working, it creates a problem. So we see also that the rapid growth of 5G will actually make IoT happening, and IoT will feed a lot of data into AI, and all of this actually embraces the digital ambition and leadership we have in the EU. So why is all this important? That's because we need data flows, and we need international data flows to feed all of this. So we need the connectivity, that's one side. But the connectivity, the Internet of Things, the AI needs also data to grow and to make Europe a digital leader. So the free flow of data is extremely important for Europe, and it's also important that we have access to free flow of data with the rest of the world. If we look at the Schrems II ruling, how did it affect us as telcos? We're not covered by the privacy shield, but our US-based subcontractors are covered by the privacy shield. So of course, in the bigger ecosystem, whatever happens with the privacy shield affect us because of our subcontractors. If we look at what our members are working mostly with, that actually also reflects what Cecilia is saying in their report. It's the standard contractual clauses that the ETNO members uses the most. But we think because of the ecosystem that we need, of course, sustainable solutions going forward, because we need that exchange of data, we need data transfers all over the world. So it needs also to be a good solution between the EU and the US. We have a strong transatlantic relationship in ETNO, and we work very much with our US counterparts. So of course, we find this is extremely important. Also, as I was saying, we have a very complex technological ecosystem. We have it with 5G that will be much more virtual, and we will use much more data in those networks. We'll have IoT and we'll have AI. And all of this will actually need those data transfers to be working on a safe and secure way, so we're not violating anything. So I think this is extremely important for Europe going forward.
Thank you very much, Lisa. This is indeed relevant input, highlighting the pressing needs of the telco sector. We unfortunately have only about 15 minutes left, and I would love that we try to take to look at things from a bird's perspective, to take a bird's eye view, and reflect upon how can we, what global moves can be made to facilitate data flows outside the EU. I would first of all here mention the tendency of data localization, which we have seen emerging in the European Union. It has been present in some of the proposed pieces of legislation. And also the creation of the European Cloud Federation is also seen by some as the move towards data localization. Cecilia, we know that Digital Europe has been quite vocal against geographic restrictions when it comes to data processing and data storage. Do you think, if you could just briefly answer, do you think that trends to boost the data localization tendencies in the EU, and do you see it can be especially detrimental? I think we can't hear you.
I have to get to that I do this. So no. What I said is, I mean, of course, this can be damaging. I mean, the concrete case is that if we implement now the interpretation of the Data Protection Board, we will have a huge disruption in data flows. So we need to find a solution. I was very glad to hear that the Commission are really working constructively to find a solution on this. Of course, we need to respect all rights, but we also don't want to go back to both data localization with Europe that should actually have full adequacy, but we see some tendencies towards that in some states, and we need to be very careful that we don't enhance that in the Data Governance Act, where some of the material right now can be interpreted like enhancing further data localization even within the EU. Second of all, we need to work with the frameworks that we've already done. So we have data adequacy with several countries. We have data adequacy with Japan, hopefully also soon with the UK. We have frameworks that we can actually bring to the international level, both for trade agreements and for adequacy agreements. And we are quite far in discussing, different risk levels of data, both within the GDPR that actually allows, for and wants to enhance data transfers, so that it's actually possible within the GDPR already. So instead of trying to stop it, I think it's much better to move it forward, of course, at different speeds with the continents, because there are many different trading partners, US being one of the like-minded, maybe China has extremely different rules, but we need to drive towards an open economy with data transfers at different speeds, maybe, but definitely that should be the ultimate goal. I mean, if we look at the main profits of companies today, it comes from data and services, and services that are basically heavily loaded with value of data. If we cannot do business, how will we do it? I mean, we're going to turn back to doing business within Denmark or only within the EU. We must facilitate this, and we have the tools. We need to use the tools. I'm confident that the Commission and together with member states that we will find a solution. I mean, if you look right now, we know that 85% of all growth will come outside Europe. Where does that leave European global companies if they can't transfer data? It would be devastating for our economy. And of course, we should put demands on our trading partners to find solutions with us. But that's the road ahead that we should take.
Thank you, Cecilia. Alisa, if you could briefly tell us, what is the European Commission doing to secure data ocean? What are the global initiatives you are involved in?
Sure. I would maybe also like to take this opportunity to also respond to some of the things that have been said. Maybe first on this point of restriction or banning data or data localization, I just want to be clear that we are very much aware of the distinction between data protectionism and data protection. And I think this is the Commission has this in public statements. It's also clearly reflected in the data strategy, in the Data Governance Act. So it's not about keeping data in Europe. It's not about data localization, which generally has nothing to do with data protection or privacy, even though this is sometimes used wrongly as a justification for that. But for the EU and for the Commission, it's about being open to data flows while ensuring continuity of protection. And in fact, data localization is something that we consistently try to fight, for example, in trade negotiations. And a recent example is the agreement with the UK that explicitly exclude data localization. And I think this openness to data flows, I think this is also reflected more generally in our broader agenda. Indeed, Japan was mentioned a few times. We're also very close to concluding now the adequacy talks with South Korea. We already presented after adequacy decision for the UK. We're engaged with several other Asian and Latin American countries. So this is part of our broader agenda on the international front when it relates to data protection and data flows. Coming back to the issue that we're discussing today, maybe very briefly to what was said about TREMS 2 and the double standards or the double standards. Here again, I want to be clear that what the judgment was about, what the Court of Justice said, was essentially about general principles of necessity and proportionality that are general principles in human rights law that, of course, also apply within the EU. I think that has to be very clear. So there is no different standard. The same principle apply, and especially in the past months, we've seen that also the laws of our own member states have been found invalid or unlawful because they didn't comply with these same principles. So I think, and that's of course also what we're focusing on in our discussions with the US. And I think in the end, it comes down to finding a solution that indeed incorporates and meets these general principles of necessity and proportionality. And I agree that with a like-minded partner like the US, it should be possible to find a solution to this. And that brings me more to the more general question that I think that the TREMS 2 judgment has raised. And that is, I think, how do you protect personal data in a world where indeed transfers are necessary? They take place as we speak all the time. And how do you also protect data from issues such as disproportionate government access? And we're now focusing very much on the EU, but what is interesting is we're not the only ones having these type of discussions. Countries in the rest of the world, including the US, are having the same type of discussions. And more countries around the world are addressing similar challenges that come with the new digital globalized world in similar ways. For example, by putting in place similar privacy laws. And we also very much think that there is now also a momentum for like-minded countries to work together on these issues. There was earlier in the panel also a call for cooperation between countries on these issues, and this cooperation is taking place, or it's starting to take place. There are very interesting initiatives at multilateral level to work together, for example, on developing standards at the international level, including when it comes to how to deal with government access and how to prevent disproportionate government access. So for example, the initiative that was launched by Japan on data free flow with trust. There's also very interesting work ongoing in the OECD on developing specific standards. And we very much believe in the Commission that it's also this work that will be part of a broader, more long-term response, not only to the specific issues raised by the Schrems II judgment, but also more generally to these more fundamental questions that it has raised and that around the world we are dealing with and trying to find solutions with. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Alisa. Just briefly, speaking of the data localization issue, Lisa, I think you could maybe tell us, how do you perceive from the in the telco industry the formation of the cloud federation, specifically Gaia-X and Edge Cloud, which can be seen as an accelerator of data localization. Is it positive? Does it bring us positive developments? Does it bring positive to the telco industry?
Well, thank you, Anna. I think Gaia-X is not moving into more stricter localization demand. It's actually open for everyone. Gaia-X is the governance structure that actually federates the cloud solutions in Europe, but it's open to all companies. What it actually is trying is to incorporate European values and principles, which I think is extremely important. And I think those are also the basis for all the tools we have in Europe. It's our privacy, it's the security. And I think this needs to be the baseline of whatever we do with data. Whatever we do with data transfer, it needs to actually comply with the EU regulation on privacy and security. But the cloud and Gaia-X is an extremely interesting governance structure that we support very much, because we think we need to move into the cloud business, not as data centers, but as edge cloud. Edge cloud will be very important. We move into edge computing. We have in the 5 systems, and all of our IT will need much more of European edge cloud. And that will be open for all players within Gaia-X, both the Americans and the rest of the world, plus European, of course.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We only have, unfortunately, 4 minutes left, which I would like to spend maybe on one question. We are hearing that the enactment of a federal US data privacy law could help speed up the bilateral talks with the EU. Mr. Breyer, do you think federal US data protection law would help? And I would also like to hear after that Mr. Montgomery's views.
It's definitely the right solution. Creating an adequate level of data protection, also the United States, would be the ideal solution. And I myself am also happy to be shared, for my data to be shared internationally, where it is adequately protected. And so data localization is not a value as such. I welcome the fact that there are initiatives, including bipartisan ones to establish a federal US privacy legislation. And even though I'm aware that, as far as I know, it wouldn't create an adequate level of protection according to the current drafts, because mostly about transparency and less about data flow management. And also, it wouldn't fix the mass surveillance problems that we would still be dealing with. But a federal data protection regime would be of great value, both to Americans that would enjoy it, but also to Europeans that are also affected by data processing in the United States, and also to industry, by the way, because it ensures trust. And I'm sure that a strong level of protecting personal data is ultimately in the interest of industry. And it's a precondition for citizens to be ready to use their services. And therefore, we should be fighting on the same side when it comes to this issue.
Do you think the Californian privacy law provides a good model for the federal? Or
yes, I think it's a good, it's a very good model and starting point. As I said, it's probably not in itself adequate and still doesn't deal with the problems with mass surveillance by the intelligence agencies. But when it comes to protection in the private sector, it's a very good starting point.
Thank you very much. Finally, Mark, do you have any views? Is it possible to hope for a federal U.S. data privacy law or not?
So yes, I think you're going to see there's a greater appetite in the U.S. It's the state legislation and other countries' adoption of laws. So I think we will have a federal privacy law. I think it'll come after a data notification and incident reporting law. So it'll take a year of legislative work before we get to it. It won't meet what Mr. Breyer brought up, but I don't think that's realistic in any case. I do think we could codify PPD 28, which provide the limitations on bulk collection of data, which again, I think there's an implication in the previous speaker statements that we're doing that. We're not doing it. In fact, I feel much safer in the United States than I would in Europe over that, or in the UK. Or individual countries are up in the UK. But the big picture is, I think we will get some kind of data privacy law over the next 1 to 2 years. I think we will get some codification of guidance to SA to make law what is already policy. And I think that'll help a lot for the US and the European Commission to reach new agreements. And so I'm generally optimistic, but it won't be a California type law, and I don't think it's necessary.
Mark, I definitely think that your optimistic conclusion is also a good conclusion to our today's panel. I really regret that we are out of time and cannot continue further this interactive discussion that I'm very glad that you all engaged in. I would like to thank you all very much for your participation and for taking time in your busy schedule to join us here. I would love to hear more of your views, and hopefully there will soon be an opportunity for that. I hope that we have at least touched upon some pressing issues that we have highlighted, why it's so pressing to find a solution and to continue with the dialogue, why it's pressing for the industry, and also why is it pressing for the individuals to preserve full control over their data and how it's treated, how it's processed, since it's one of the fundamental human rights in the EU. Thank you again, and I would say we can get back to the Cybersec organizers. Thank you very much.